1890. Portrait recovered, and historians are startled when zooming in on the woman. The August heat pressed against the windows of the old Victorian house in Philadelphia as Daniel Foster climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust particles floated through shafts of afternoon light, illuminating decades of forgotten belongings stacked in careful disorder. His grandmother had passed 3 months ago, and the house, standing since 1875, now belonged to him and his sister Rebecca. "There's so much up here," Rebecca said, wiping sweat from her forehead. She opened a trunk filled with yellowed linens and moth-eaten quilts. "We'll be sorting through this for months." Daniel moved toward the far corner where leather cases and wooden boxes leaned against the wall. Something about their careful arrangement suggested intentionality, as if someone had placed them there with purpose rather than simply storing them away. He knelt before a flat leather portfolio, its surface cracked with age but still intact. "What did you find?" Rebecca asked, moving closer. He unbuckled the brass clasps and lifted the cover. Inside, wrapped in cloth that might once have been white, lay a large photograph mounted on thick cardboard. The sepia tones had faded but remained clear enough to distinguish faces. A family of 7 stood before a modest wooden house, their expressions solemn in the way of 19th century portraits. "It's dated 1890, Daniel said, pointing to faint pencil marks on the back. "Philip and Catherine Foster family, those are our ancestors." Rebecca leaned in, studying the faces. The man stood tall with a thick beard, his hand resting on the shoulder of a boy. 3 other children ranged in age from perhaps 6 to 15. But it was the woman, Catherine, who drew their attention. She stood slightly apart, her dark dress formal and high-necked, her hair pulled back severely. Her eyes seemed to hold something beyond the typical stoicism of old photographs, a depth, a weight of experience. Around her neck hung an ornate necklace, clearly visible even in the aged photograph. The piece seemed elaborate for what appeared to be a modest household. "That's beautiful," Rebecca said. "I wonder if it still exists somewhere." Daniel pulled out his phone and activated the camera, zooming in on Catherine's face. The modern technology brought the image into sharper focus. He moved the frame slowly across her features, then down to the necklace. He froze. "Rebecca, look at this." She leaned over his shoulder as he zoomed further into the pendant. What had seemed like simple ornamentation revealed something impossible. Inside the pendant's center was another photograph. A face, a child's face, an African-American girl. But this child appeared nowhere in the family portrait. Rebecca grabbed the phone from Daniel's hand, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the zoom. The image remained clear, a young African-American girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, her expression serious, her hair braided close to her scalp. The photograph within the photograph measured no more than a 1/4 inch in diameter, yet the detail was extraordinary. "How is this even possible?" Rebecca whispered. Photography in 1890 couldn't capture something this small, could it? Daniel took the phone back, capturing a screenshot. "Actually, it could. I remember reading about this, microphotography. It was a Victorian technique, incredibly rare and expensive. They used specialized lenses to photograph tiny portraits that could fit inside jewelry. But why would Catherine have a picture of this child hidden in her necklace?" They sat in silence, the attic's heat suddenly oppressive. Daniel looked again at Catherine's face in the larger portrait, at the subtle set of her jaw, the way her eyes seemed to carry secrets. "The child isn't part of the family," Rebecca said slowly, "at least not officially. So who was she?" Daniel stood and began searching through nearby boxes with renewed urgency. Their grandmother had been meticulous about family history, keeping documents and letters organized by generation. If there was an explanation, it would be here. Rebecca pulled out a wooden box marked with Catherine's name. Inside lay a collection of papers, receipts, letters, a small leather-bound journal. She opened the journal carefully, its pages brittle with age. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if written in stolen moments. "Listen to this," Rebecca said, reading aloud. "March 15th, 1888. Another soul passed through last night. I gave her bread and the warmest blanket we could spare. She wept when she saw her freedom papers. Philip says I must be more careful. But how can I turn away from this work?" Daniel's breath caught. "Passed through. Freedom papers. Rebecca, Catherine was part of the Underground Railroad." "But the Civil War ended in 1865, Rebecca said, confusion crossing her face. "The Underground Railroad stopped operating after emancipation." "Not entirely," Daniel replied. "Even after the war, there were cases. People still enslaved in remote areas, children separated from families during slavery who needed help reuniting. The network didn't completely disappear." Rebecca turned more pages, finding entries that spoke of packages delivered, of stations and conductors, the coded language of the Underground Railroad. Catherine's words painted a picture of a woman who had risked everything to help others find safety. But nowhere did Catherine mention the child in the photograph. 2 days later, Daniel and Rebecca sat across from Dr. Helen Okonkwo in the climate-controlled archive room of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. The original photograph lay between them on a padded examination table. Dr. Okonkwo, a specialist in 19th century photography and African American history, studied the image through a jeweler's loupe. "This is remarkable," she said, adjusting the magnification. The microphotograph is exceptionally well preserved. The technique was called Stanhope photography, named after the optical devices used to view them. But finding one embedded in a necklace, documenting an African-American child in this context, this is genuinely extraordinary. She set down the loop and pulled her laptop closer. You said Catherine's journal referenced Underground Railroad activity in the late 1880s? Yes, Daniel confirmed. The entries span from 1885 to 1891. Dr. Okonkwo nodded, typing rapidly. That aligns with what we know about post-war rescue efforts. Many formerly enslaved children were separated from their parents during the war. Some were held illegally, others trapped in exploitative labor. There were organized efforts, often led by women like Catherine, to locate these children and reunite them with family. She pulled up a database of historical records. Without a name, we're searching through thousands of possibilities. Did you find anything else? Rebecca scrolled through photos on her phone. There was this... She stopped at an image of a folded paper. We didn't open it fully because it seemed fragile, but you can see names on the outside. Dr. Okonkwo enlarged the image. The writing was faded but legible. Sarah, Delaware, 1889, delivered to freedom. Sarah, the archivist repeated softly. Delaware in 1889 would fit the timeline. If Catherine helped this girl escape and kept her photograph in her necklace, there was something deeply significant about this case. Daniel leaned forward. How do we find out more about Sarah? Dr. Okonkwo smiled, though her expression carried weight. We'll need to search Freedmen's Bureau records, Quaker Society documents, church registries, county records from Delaware. Many of these children's stories were deliberately hidden to protect them. She looked again at Catherine's face in the photograph. But your ancestor clearly thought this story was worth preserving. She wore this child's face next to her heart. That tells me Sarah's story matters. 3 weeks of research had transformed Daniel's dining room into a makeshift archive. Papers covered every surface. Photocopies of census records, printed emails from historical societies, timelines scrawled on poster board. Rebecca visited most evenings after work, and tonight she brought news. I found something, she said, laying her laptop on the table. Dr. Okonkwo connected me with a researcher in Delaware who specializes in post-Civil War African-American communities. Look at this. The screen displayed a scanned document from the Dover Quaker Meeting House, dated September 1889. The entry read, Received into our care one child, Sarah, aged approximately 9 years, delivered from unlawful bondage by friends, working in coordination with Philadelphia contacts. Child shows signs of previous ill treatment but is in fair health. Placed temporarily with the household of Thomas and Mary Pritchard. Daniel read the entry 3 times. This has to be her. The timing matches exactly. Philadelphia contacts. That's Catherine. There's more, Rebecca said, scrolling down. Listen, young Sarah has made remarkable progress. After extensive inquiries, we have located her mother, Eliza, who was sold away from Delaware in 1882 and has obtained her freedom in Maryland. Reunion arranged for April 1890. The joy of mother and child upon seeing each other after 8 years is beyond description. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked at the family photograph propped against the wall. She reunited them, he said quietly. Catherine helped save Sarah and reunite her with her mother. Rebecca wiped her eyes. 8 years old when they were separated. Daniel zoomed in again on Sarah's serious young face. What courage had it taken? What had it meant to Catherine that she succeeded in this rescue? Why this child? Rebecca asked. Catherine helped dozens of people. Why was Sarah the one whose photograph she kept? Daniel clicked through files, stopping at a Quaker meeting record. The entry about Sarah's arrival included, Child bears a scar upon her left forearm, result of a burn, and shows considerable distress when approached suddenly. His stomach tightened. The clinical language couldn't hide the implications. Maybe Catherine couldn't forget what had been done to this little girl, he said softly. Wearing her photograph was a promise that she wouldn't be forgotten. Daniel returned to his grandmother's attic on a cool Saturday morning, convinced they had missed something. He worked methodically through boxes, checking inside books for loose papers, examining drawer undersides, looking for hiding places a careful woman might use. In a wooden secretary desk, he found a drawer that seemed shallower than it should be. He removed it completely and felt along the interior space. His fingers touched paper. A package of letters, tied with faded ribbon, had been concealed in the false bottom. The top letter was addressed to my dearest Catherine, in careful, newly literate handwriting. He read, My dearest Catherine, I hope this letter finds you well. I write to tell you that Sarah and I are settled now in Baltimore. She's growing so tall and strong, you would not recognize the frightened child you delivered to Dover. She speaks of you often and asks me to send her love. She says you promised she would see her mama again, and because of you, she did. I cannot ever repay what you've done for us. Your friend always, Eliza. The letter was dated June 1890. Daniel photographed it and continued reading. 7 more letters spanned 3 years, documenting Sarah's progress, her education, her health, small details Eliza thought Catherine would want to know. In December 1891, Eliza wrote, Sarah asks me to tell you she's learning to read very good now. The teacher says she has a gift. She made me promise to tell you special that she is not afraid anymore when it gets dark. She says remembering you told her she was brave helps her feel safe. Daniel sat back, overwhelmed. These weren't just reports. They showed continued relationship. Catherine hadn't simply rescued Sarah. She had become someone whose words carried comfort long after they parted. The final letter, dated March 1893. Dear Catherine, I must tell you, Sarah and I are moving to Philadelphia. I have found work at a textile factory. Sarah made me promise to ask, could we visit you? She would very much like to thank you herself. With deepest gratitude, Eliza. Daniel immediately called Rebecca. They came to Philadelphia. They might have met Catherine again. On the envelope's back, he noticed Catherine's handwriting. Answered April 2nd, 1893. They will come to tea on Sunday. They had met again. Dr. Okonkwo's office had become their headquarters. Today, she had news. Spread across her desk were photocopies from the registry of the Institute for Colored Youth, one of the premier African-American schools in 19th century Philadelphia. Sarah attended school here, Dr. Okonkwo said, pointing to an entry dated September 1893. Her full name is listed as Sarah Morrison. She took her mother's surname. The records show she was enrolled for 5 years until 1898. Daniel studied the entries. Each term listed Sarah's progress. Excellent marks in reading and composition, strong performance in mathematics, particular aptitude in history. Teacher comments praised her remarkable memory for dates and events. There's more, Dr. Okonkwo continued. I found her in the 1900 census. She's living in Philadelphia, age 20, listed as a teacher's assistant at the very school she attended. By 1910, she's a full teacher there. Rebecca shook her head in wonder. From enslaved child to educator in one generation. It required extraordinary support, Dr. Okonkwo said. Someone had to pay for Sarah's education, provide stability. Education wasn't free, even at colored schools. Daniel caught the implication. You think Catherine helped support her education? Look at this. Dr. Okonkwo laid out a financial ledger. There's an anonymous scholarship fund established in 1893, the same year Sarah enrolled. It paid full tuition for one female student each year. The fund was administered through a lawyer's office. I contacted the firm. They're still in operation. After explaining our research, they searched their historical files. She paused. The scholarship fund was established by Catherine Foster. The first recipient was Sarah Morrison. The room fell silent. Daniel looked at Catherine's photograph. The woman who had risked everything to save a child had continued supporting her, ensuring she had every opportunity. Catherine died in 1918, Rebecca said quietly. Did the scholarship continue? Dr. Okonkwo nodded. She left a bequest to maintain it for 50 years. The fund supported 93 young women before it was depleted in 1968. Girls were receiving Catherine's help through the civil rights movement, Daniel said. She created something that lasted beyond her lifetime. Dr. Okonkwo pulled up a photograph on her laptop. This is from the school's 1915 50th anniversary celebration. The image showed teachers posed on school steps. In the second row stood Sarah Morrison, now in her mid-30s. Standing beside her, hand resting on Sarah's shoulder, was elderly Catherine. They stayed close, Daniel breathed. Dr. Okonkwo had arranged access to the school's complete archives, housed in a temperature-controlled basement beneath the Historical Society. Daniel and Rebecca followed her down narrow stairs into a room lined with filing cabinets and document boxes. The smell of old paper filled the air. Sarah taught at the Institute for 32 years, Dr. Okonkwo said, pulling out a box labeled Faculty Records 1900-1920. She became one of their most respected educators. Her students remembered her decades later. She spread out documents across a work table. Teacher evaluations praised Sarah's exceptional dedication and ability to inspire even the most reluctant learners. A newspaper clipping from 1916 featured her in an article about innovative teaching methods, describing how she used storytelling to make history come alive for her students. She specialized in teaching history, Rebecca noted, reading over the article. That's fitting, given her own story. Daniel picked up a leather-bound book, a collection of essays written by students in 1914. One essay, by a girl named Dorothy, began, My teacher, Miss Morrison, says that history is not just about presidents and wars. She says it is about ordinary people, doing extraordinary things when the moment demands it. She says we all have that courage inside us, waiting for when we need it most. The words hit Daniel with unexpected force. Sarah had taken the lesson of her own rescue and transformed it into something she could give others. Hope, courage, the belief that ordinary people could change the world. Here's something interesting, Dr. Okonkwo said, holding up a staff photograph from 1917. This was taken 1 year before Catherine died. Sarah is here, age 37, and look, she's wearing a necklace. Daniel and Rebecca leaned in. The photograph was clear enough to see that Sarah wore a pendant around her neck. Though the image wasn't sharp enough to make out details, the shape was unmistakable. A locket, similar in style to the one Catherine had worn. Do you think, Rebecca began, that Catherine gave it to her? Dr. Okonkwo finished. or that Sarah had one made in the same style. Either way, it suggests the connection between them remained powerful. Daniel found more evidence of that connection in Catherine's obituary, preserved in a Philadelphia newspaper from January 1918. Among those listed as mourners at her funeral was Miss Sarah Morrison, educator, longtime family friend. Family friend, Rebecca repeated softly. That's how they described it publicly, but it was so much more than that. Dr. Okonkwo pulled out one final document, a handwritten letter on Institute stationery dated February 1918, 1 month after Catherine's death. It was addressed to Catherine's children, signed by Sarah. Daniel read it aloud. Your mother changed the course of my life when I was a frightened child who had lost all hope. She taught me that I was worth saving, worth educating, worth believing in. Everything I have become, I owe to her courage. I will honor her memory by continuing the work she began, helping young people understand their own worth and potential. With deepest sympathy and eternal gratitude, Sarah Morrison. The letter's formal language couldn't quite hide the depth of emotion beneath it. Daniel thought about the little girl in the microphotograph, the woman she had become, and the legacy that connected them across more than a century. The trail of Sarah's later life proved more difficult to follow. Census records showed her continuing to teach through the 1920s, living in a modest home in South Philadelphia with her mother, Eliza, until Eliza's death in 1927. After that, the records became sparse. Rebecca found her in the 1930 census, age 50, still teaching, now listed as head of household with 2 young women living with her, both identified as boarders and students. The pattern repeated in 1940. Sarah, age 60, with 3 young women in her home, all students. She was taking in students, Rebecca said, showing Daniel the records, giving them a place to live while they attended school, just like Catherine supported her. Dr. Okonkwo had found similar patterns in the Institute's records. Multiple students from the 1920s and 1930s listed Sarah's address as their residence. Letters of recommendation she wrote for students praised not just their academic achievements, but their strength of character and determination to overcome obstacles. She knew what it meant to overcome obstacles, Daniel said, and she made sure other young women had the same chance she'd been given. They found Sarah's death certificate from 1952. She had lived to 72, dying peacefully in her sleep according to the hospital records. Her obituary in the Philadelphia Tribune, a prominent African-American newspaper, was surprisingly detailed. Sarah Morrison, retired educator, died Monday at her home, Rebecca read aloud. She taught at the Institute for Colored Youth for more than 3 decades, influencing generations of students. Miss Morrison was known for her dedication to education and her support of young women pursuing their studies. She was particularly passionate about teaching African-American history, often telling her students, "Our stories matter, our courage matters, never let anyone tell you otherwise." The obituary listed numerous former students who had become teachers, nurses, businesswomen, all crediting Sarah's influence. One, a teacher named Ruth, was quoted, "Miss Morrison saved my life, though I didn't know I needed saving. She saw potential in me I couldn't see in myself. She taught me that my past didn't define my future." Daniel set down the paper. She became for others what Catherine was for her. "Look at the funeral arrangements," Dr. Okonkwo said, pointing to the bottom of the obituary. "She was buried at Eden Cemetery. That's one of the historic African-American cemeteries in the area. And look at this detail. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Sarah Morrison Scholarship Fund for young women pursuing education." She established her own scholarship, Rebecca said, continuing what Catherine started. They drove to Eden Cemetery the following Saturday. The cemetery spread across rolling hills in Collingdale just outside Philadelphia. Elaborate monuments marked some graves, simple stones marked others. They found Sarah's grave in a quiet section beneath an oak tree. The headstone was modest. Sarah Morrison, 1880, 1952, teacher. She lit the way for others. But beside it stood another stone, weathered and older. Eliza Morrison, 1855, 1927, beloved mother. Mother and daughter together again, just as Catherine had ensured they would be in life. Back in Dr. Okonkwo's office, Daniel voiced the question that had been building for weeks. What do we do with all this? It's an amazing story, but is it just for us? Should it be shared more widely? Dr. Okonkwo leaned back in her chair. I've been thinking about that. This story deserves to be told, not just because it's compelling, but because it documents something important. Catherine's network, Sarah's rescue, the scholarship fund, Sarah's teaching career, together they show how individual acts of courage created lasting change. She pulled up several documents on her computer. I've contacted the Institute's successor organization. They're very interested in featuring this story. Several of Sarah's former students are still alive. They're in their 80s and 90s now, but they remember her. They'd like to contribute their memories. Rebecca's eyes widened. They're still alive? We could actually talk to people who knew Sarah. One woman, Grace, was in Sarah's last class before she retired in 1945. She's 93 now, lives in West Philadelphia. I spoke with her daughter, who says Grace would love to talk about Miss Morrison. She says her mother credits Sarah with encouraging her to become a nurse despite her family's limited means. Daniel felt the story expanding beyond documents and photographs into living memory. When can we meet her? 3 days later, they sat in Grace's bright living room, surrounded by family photos and grandchildren's drawings. Grace herself, sharp-minded despite her age, sat in a comfortable chair by the window, a photo album open on her lap. Miss Morrison was strict, Grace said, her voice strong and clear, but fair. She expected excellence because she believed we were excellent. I remember once I told her I couldn't afford to continue school, that I needed to work full-time. She looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "Grace, someone once told me I was worth investing in, and they were right. Now I'm telling you the same thing." Grace wiped her eyes. She helped me find scholarship money, wrote letters of recommendation. When I graduated from nursing school, she came to the ceremony. She was retired by then, walking with a cane, but she came. Did she ever talk about her own past? Daniel asked gently. About her childhood? Grace nodded slowly. Not often, but once, when I was struggling with a particularly hard time, feeling like I'd never overcome my circumstances, she told me something. She said, "When I was 9 years old, I thought my life was over. I lost everything. My mother, my freedom, my hope. But a brave woman risked everything to save me. She taught me that our past shapes us but doesn't trap us. We can build new futures." And that was all she said, but it was enough. She turned a page in her album and pointed to a photograph. "This is from 1948. That's me on the left, in my nursing uniform. And that's Miss Morrison." The photograph showed two women standing together, Grace young and proud in her crisp white uniform, Sarah elderly but dignified, smiling with obvious pride. Around Sarah's neck hung a pendant. "She always wore that necklace," Grace said. "I asked her about it once. She just smiled and said it reminded her of where she came from and why her work mattered." Daniel looked at the pendant in the photograph, then at the original microphotograph on his phone. Two necklaces, two women, connected across generations by courage and hope. On a bright October morning, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania held a small exhibition opening. The centerpiece was the 1890 Foster family portrait, displayed behind protective glass, with an accompanying panel explaining the microphotograph hidden in Catherine's necklace. Next to it hung the photograph of Catherine and Sarah from 1915, documentation of a friendship that transcended the rescue. Daniel and Rebecca stood before the display with Dr. Okonkwo, watching visitors read the carefully prepared text explaining Catherine's Underground Railroad work and Sarah's subsequent life as an educator. Several descendants of Sarah's students had come, bringing their own stories of how Sarah's influence had shaped their families. Grace was there, seated in a wheelchair but alert, telling anyone who would listen about her beloved teacher. "She saved more than lives," Grace said to a group of listeners. "She saved futures. She showed us we could become anything." Dr. Okonkwo addressed the small crowd. This photograph appeared to be a simple family portrait, a moment frozen in time, but when we looked closer we found a hidden story of courage, sacrifice, and love. Catherine Foster risked her safety to rescue children like Sarah. She didn't do it for recognition. She hid the evidence literally close to her heart, and Sarah honored that gift by dedicating her life to lifting up others. She gestured to the display. These two women, generations and circumstances apart, created ripples that are still felt today. The scholarship fund Catherine established in 1893 supported nearly 100 young women. Sarah's teaching career influenced hundreds of students. Those students became teachers, nurses, leaders who influenced thousands more. That's the power of one act of courage multiplied across time. Daniel stepped forward, his voice slightly unsteady. "When Rebecca and I found this photograph in our grandmother's attic, we had no idea what we were uncovering. We thought we were just discovering family history. Instead, we found a story that belongs to all of us, a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." He looked at Catherine's face in the portrait, at the determination in her eyes, at the necklace that held Sarah's image. Catherine couldn't save everyone. The injustices she fought against were enormous, but she saved Sarah. And Sarah saved others, and those others saved more. That's how change happens. One person, one act, one choice at a time. Rebecca stood beside her brother. We've learned that history isn't just about presidents and wars. It's about a woman who wore a child's photograph next to her heart. It's about a rescued child who became a teacher. It's about courage passed down through generations. As the gathering dispersed, Daniel noticed a young woman standing before the portrait, studying it intently. She was perhaps 20, holding a notebook. "Can I help you?" he asked. She turned, smiling. "I'm writing a paper on hidden histories for my college course. This story, it's exactly what I've been looking for. Evidence that ordinary people shaped history just as much as famous ones did." She pointed to the microphotograph in the display. "That little girl, Sarah, she was real. She suffered, she survived, she mattered. And someone made sure we'd remember her. That's powerful." Daniel watched her write notes, saw the spark of inspiration in her eyes, and realized this was exactly what Catherine and Sarah would have wanted. Not monuments or grand memorials, but the simple passing of truth from one generation to the next, the quiet insistence that every life has value, every story deserves to be told. Outside, autumn sun filtered through the trees. Daniel and Rebecca walked to their car, carrying the now empty portfolio that had held the portrait for so many years. "Do you think they knew?" Rebecca asked. "Catherine and Sarah? Do you think they understood how important their story would become?" Daniel considered the question. "I think they knew their choices mattered. Catherine wore that photograph every day. She knew Sarah's life had value, and Sarah spent her career teaching others to see their own worth. Maybe they didn't think in terms of legacy, but they understood that courage isn't wasted." He looked back at the Historical Society building, where Catherine's portrait would now educate future visitors. "A photograph hidden in a necklace," he said softly. Such a small thing, but it held everything: proof of love, evidence of courage, a promise kept across decades. Some secrets are worth keeping close to your heart, and some secrets are worth revealing so the world can learn from them. They drove home through streets Catherine and Sarah had once walked, carrying with them the weight and gift of their ancestors' story, a reminder that hidden histories, when finally uncovered, can illuminate not just the past, but the present, showing us who we might yet become.